Tonight we slip quietly back into a time when sunlight was not a friend but a foe, and the gentle art of not getting a tan was a social survival skill. You carry a parasol, dainty and deliberate, your gloved fingers curling around its carved ivory handle. It's a cool morning in London, cool by temperature, not by mood. Because if you, dear listener, dare show even a whisper of a suntan above your gloves, you might as well announce to society that you've been digging ditches. Victorian England isn't subtle about skin tone. Pale means pure. Pale means wealthy enough to avoid the sun. Pale means you don't work, and in a society obsessed with class and appearances, not working is your best job. You probably won't survive this, let's be honest, but it's all right. Tonight, you're just here to listen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You emerge into the garden, your skirts sweeping gravel like a broom made of satin. Everything about you is arranged, the tilt of your bonnet, the gloss on your boots, and most importantly, the parasol hovering over your shoulder like a loyal little moon. This isn't just a tool. It's a shield. A statement. A silent but emphatic no to freckles and social ruin. Parasols in the Victorian era weren't like today's convenience store umbrellas. These were fashion artillery. Silk, lace, and whalebone ribbing came together in careful craftsmanship. Handles were often carved from ivory, ebony, or tortoiseshell. If yours had mother-of-pearl inlay, you were winning. If it collapsed too easily, you were toast, literally and socially. You pause under a pergola wrapped in climbing roses, and someone smiles politely from across the lawn. You nod back, remembering to keep the parasol just slightly to the left to block the rising sun but not your eye contact. This is a dance you've practiced. Historians still argue whether the obsession with paleness was purely class-based or if deeper anxieties, colonialism, racial superiority, even urban industrial gloom were wrapped in the lace of social preference. What's certain is that any respectable lady had to work as hard to stay untanned as she did to appear effortlessly idle. A mainstream fact, Queen Victoria herself popularized the look of eternal moonlight complexion. Her mourning dress and her lifelong sun avoidance set a tone. Suddenly, every woman in Britain wanted skin untouched by light. It became an arms race of shade. Now, here's a fringe tidbit. Some upper-class ladies rubbed their faces with vinegar-soaked breadcrumbs to draw out any rogue freckles. Not exactly a dermatologist-approved method. Others swore by a paste made of lead and chalk, a regimen that, let's say, had some permanent side effects. You shift your grip as a breeze rustles the canopy above you. The parasol quivers slightly. That won't do. You steady it with your wrist, holding it above your head like a priest lifting a relic. Because that's what it is, really, a sacred object of class devotion. And while you're here, be warned, no part of your forearm should ever see daylight. Gloves are your backup dancers. Parasols are the star of the show. Hats help, but only to a point. Bonnets can't fend off that sideways sun like a well-angled parasol can. Plus, you can't exactly wave a bonnet flirtatiously at a passerby. That's parasol territory. A gentle stroll past the hedge maze reveals another party of ladies. One is younger, perhaps fresh out of finishing school, and her umbrella is slightly too large for her frame. It droops at an angle, and you wince in solidarity. We've all been there, learning the mechanics of shade in public without looking like you're about to launch a kite. And yes, the etiquette is real. You never twirl the parasol unless you're under the age of 5 or mentally preparing to become a scandalous poet. You never rest it on your shoulder like a fishing rod. You definitely never let the wind flip it inside out. If that happens, you pretend you meant to do it. Then you disappear indoors for the rest of the season. Oh, and don't even think about opening one indoors. Bad luck, obviously. But more than that, it suggests you're unfamiliar with the rules. And the rules are everything. You pass a mirror in the conservatory and check your face, not for vanity, but for evidence. Evidence that the sun has touched you. A tiny pink flush across the cheek could mean hours of corrective powder. A line across the neckline? Social exile. Like, T invites revoked level exile. There's something oddly serene about all this fuss, though. Like fencing or ballet, the restrictions create a rhythm. You have to move carefully. You have to pay attention. It's not just about hiding from the sun. It's about mastering the art of existing visibly while remaining untouched. Later, as you sip weak tea under a striped canopy, you watch a dragonfly hover near the lip of your parasol. For a moment, it's just you, the filtered light, and the memory of someone saying, "A lady's skin must always resemble porcelain, cool, fragile, and impossibly hard to imitate." And you think, porcelain doesn't sweat. But you smile anyway. Because you know the game, and you play it well. You wake early, not because you're particularly eager, but because timing is everything. Victorian mornings are all about appearances. The morning promenade isn't just a walk, it's a socially sanctioned performance, a live-action tableau of wealth, virtue, and umbrella angles. You step onto the gravel path, parasol already unfurled with a satisfying snap. Not too fast. Not too flashy. There's an art to the reveal. It's like opening a fan at a masquerade ball. It says you're ready, composed, and, above all, shaded. The sun hasn't quite risen high enough to be threatening yet, but you're no fool. Those rays creep. So you shift your parasol just ahead of your shoulder, the edge casting an elegant crescent shadow across your upper chest. It's not dramatic, but it does the job. You're not blocking the sun completely, just reminding it who's boss. Your shoes crunch softly over the path, the dew still clinging to the edges of the grass. Each step is measured. You've trained for this, literally. Finishing schools often included posture and parasol drills. How to walk without looking rushed. How to pause mid-step to adjust your grip. How to tilt the parasol so it appears natural, never frantic, even as your arm begs for a break. That's one of the big secrets of the promenade. It's an endurance sport in disguise. Holding a parasol aloft for over an hour without switching arms is a feat your bicep burns. You ignore it. Grace doesn't sweat. The design of your parasol helps. It's featherlight, silk-stretched over fine steel ribs. The Victorian umbrella industry was surprisingly high-tech. An 1852 invention by Samuel Fox introduced paragon ribs, making the frame sturdier but lighter. This allowed for bigger, flouncier, more fashionable parasols. Naturally, they also became more competitive. But we'll get to that. A passing couple nods to you, man tipping his hat, woman offering a faint smile from beneath a ruffled bonnet. You return the gesture, never slowing your pace. You're in the promenade zone now. Each lady's parasol is angled slightly differently, depending on the sun's position, the direction she's walking, and, let's be honest, the shape of her jawline. And here's a strange but true tidbit. Some ladies trained with mirrored contraptions to determine their most flattering shadow angle. One reportedly invented a tabletop device that mimicked parasol shade so she could practice expressions under simulated dappled light. Victorian dedication, or Victorian madness. Historians still argue whether these shade rehearsals were common among elites or just eccentric upper-crust anomalies. As you walk, the parasol etiquette becomes part of your body. You notice a woman in the distance holding hers too high, her upper chest dangerously exposed to the morning light. Scandalous. Another tilts hers at too steep an angle, completely shadowing her face. It's a rookie mistake. It suggests secrecy. Or worse, a spot she's trying to hide. Everything your parasol does must feel like an accident. Effortless. Subtle. There's no shade throwing in the literal sense unless, of course, you're dealing with Lady Meredith, who once angled her umbrella so sharply toward another woman's face during a promenade that the gossip rags speculated for weeks. A gesture of shade, they called it. Pun very much intended. You reach the curved end of the path, pausing under a sycamore tree to feign appreciation for a bird. Really, you just need a breather. Your arm is aching. But you won't lower the parasol until you're out of view. Never let the sun catch you resting. By now, the park is filling in. Children with nannies in tow. Men in top hats strolling with canes. Elderly women claiming benches like queens staking territory. But it's the other parasols that demand your attention. Some are plain muslin. Others are extravagantly embroidered, tipping dangerously into the realm of vanity. One particularly bold woman carries a parasol fringed with tiny silk pom-poms. You admire her commitment, but inwardly you scoff. Pom-poms. In May. Boldness has its limits. Another lady passes you with a parasol clearly imported from the East, delicate rice paper, bamboo ribs, hand-painted florals. Exotic, expensive, and utterly impractical for a damp English morning. It's beautiful. You hate how much you want one. You smile anyway, nodding graciously. The promenade is not for personal expression. It's for silent comparison. By the time you reach the fountain at the park center, your entire body is tuned to the parasol's needs. You've readjusted the tilt 4 times to track the sun. You've resisted the urge to swap arms. You've nodded and smiled at no fewer than 7 people while keeping your shoulder blade locked at a 37-degree angle. You rest for a moment, pretending to examine a swan, then pivot elegantly on your heel to begin the walk back. And yes, you'll be using the other arm now, but only because the sun is on your right. Not because you're tired. Definitely not. The gravel crunches again beneath your boots. Somewhere behind you, a little girl shrieks with laughter, and a governess scolds her for stepping out of the shade. "Do you want freckles?" she hisses. The girl gasps as if she's been threatened with a plague. And that's the point, isn't it? The fear isn't just aesthetic, it's existential. A tan doesn't just darken your skin. It darkens your chances. In marriage. In status. In gossip circles. It suggests labor, or worse, leisure of the wrong kind. You can wear all the lace in London, but if your arms look like you've been gardening, people will talk. You reach the park gate just as the sun begins to warm the air. Perfect timing. You close your parasol with a whisper of silk and step into the waiting carriage, victorious. Your driver raises an eyebrow. "Long walk, miss?" You nod politely. "Lovely morning," you reply, as if you didn't just duel the sun with posture, poise, and perspiration masked by powder. And as the carriage rolls away, you glance down at your hands, pleased to see that your gloves are still a pristine, ghostly white. Like they never left the dressing table. Back home, you unwind the ribbon of your bonnet and release the weight of your morning routine, but the parasol remains poised on its hook, still the centerpiece of your presentation arsenal. Because make no mistake, The parasol isn't just for the sun. It's for everything unsaid. You're learning to speak fluently in parasol. That's the unspoken rule in your circle. The way you hold it, tilt it, open it, or even carry it closed, it all means something. In Victorian society, where emotions are corseted and courtship happens in glances, the parasol becomes your secret weapon of social navigation. You walk into the drawing room where a few friends are already gathered. The tea has barely been poured, but one of them, Eleanor, she of the fluttering lashes and perpetually damp eyes, has her parasol resting lightly against her shoulder, still open. Indoors. You blink. She catches your eye and gives a soft laugh, clearly aware of the breach. "Oh, I do beg pardon," she coos. "I was simply illustrating a point." Yes, you think. The point being, she wants attention. You don't say it aloud. You just perch on the settee and let your fingers trace the lace edge of your own parasol, now neatly closed, the tip nestled near your ankle. Conversation resumes, but your internal antennae are up. Because here's the thing about Victorian umbrella etiquette, it's basically social Morse code. Historians still argue whether this coded parasol language was widely taught or only practiced in tight circles of fashionable elites, but plenty of period diaries suggest women exchanged flirtations and feuds with barely a word, just flicks, angles, and choreography. Mainstream fact. Godis Lady's book, The Era's Reigning Arbiter of All Things Feminine and Proper, once published diagrams suggesting parasol positioning to indicate openness to conversation, disapproval, or even affection. Think of it like Tinder, but silkier and with far more lace. You're careful with your own movements. A slightly raised parasol to your right suggests polite distance. A lowered tip tilted forward? A signal of curiosity or flirtation. Resting it closed across your lap is neutrality. Resting it on someone else's lap? Well, you're not that bold. Outside, the weather has turned threatening, not with rain, but with the dreaded glare of noon sun, bouncing mercilessly off cobblestones. Even indoors, ladies remain strategic. Windows are shaded. Sunbeams are dodged. You watch as someone subtly adjusts their chair so the light doesn't strike their left cheek. That side always flushes first. Across from you, Lady Instruther performs a maneuver you admire even as you silently score it. She lifts her parasol open and uses it not to block the sun, but to shield a whispered conversation from a passing maid. Shade and secrecy in one fluid motion. Bravo! There's also the gossip potential of parasol behavior. Last season, a woman at a garden party used her umbrella as a prop to accidentally poke her rival in the bustle. No apology was offered. A week later, the rival was seen sporting an umbrella handle that looked suspiciously like a dagger hilt. Coincidence? Probably. But Victorian high society loves a subtle duel. You excuse yourself and step briefly into the corridor, giving your arm a break and adjusting your gloves. As you do, you glance into a gilded mirror and catch sight of yourself with your parasol loosely clasped against your side. There's a softness to the posture, an openness. You could look approachable. Or distracted. Maybe even vulnerable. And vulnerability is currency. There's a fringe tidbit. In some regions, young women would intentionally allow the sun to kiss their cheek for just a moment, just enough to create a slight flush, a pink glow, then immediately pull down the veil or raise the parasol. A fake sunburn. Fashionable feigned fragility. A small risk, for a big social gain. You remember this trick later that week during a garden lunch. The sun breaks through clouds at the wrong moment, and instead of adjusting your parasol immediately, you let it linger. Just 2 seconds. Just enough to warm one cheekbone. Then you raise the lace veil. You feel it catch the light like a secret. Someone notices. A certain someone with a cravat that's just a little too tight and a gaze just a little too long. You lower your eyes demurely and raise your parasol again. That's the message. I see you. But not too much. Parasol language isn't just for flirtation, of course. It's also a tool of exclusion. A high tilt can say we are conversing, you may not join. A deliberate close followed by walking away. That's a mic drop in Victorian. The sheer number of parasols a woman might own reflects the variety of this silent vocabulary. A pale yellow silk for daytime tea. A heavier satin with jet beading for evening walks. A see-through lace number utterly useless for sun protection, for events where form beats function. And then there's the one with the slightly menacing steel tip. That's for traveling. Or feuding. One woman you know, Miss Rowena, whose opinions come wrapped in compliments, once refused to lend her parasol to a friend who'd forgotten hers. She claimed it was too delicate. The friend left the event with a tan line on one shoulder and never recovered socially. That parasol wasn't just shade. It was sabotage. You've learned to observe these patterns. To read the rhythm of a conversation not in words, but in the way someone adjusts her parasol edge to create just enough privacy, or just enough exclusion. And then there are the accidents, though few truly believe they're accidents. A gust of wind catching a parasol and flipping it open in someone's face. Unlucky, yes. But sometimes just, well-timed. You return to the sitting room and resume your seat. A friend hands you a biscuit without speaking, her fingers grazing yours in that casually practiced way. You glance down and notice the way she's placed her parasol between you. Not on her other side. Between. That's not random. That's a wall. You smile. Noted. You'll remember it next time she asks to borrow your yellow silk. You're on your way to the dressmaker's this afternoon, and naturally, the parasol is with you. Not merely an accessory, but the central performer in today's outfit. You carry it closed for now, angled downward, tip grazing the edge of your walking boot in a manner that suggests casual poise. But even like this, it's saying something. You're observant, unbothered, and more fashionable than the entire street combined. The day is bright, nearly cloudless, and the sun takes no prisoners. You cross the square, passing by carriages and flower sellers and at least two ladies already battling the light with their own delicate domes of lace and shadow. You nod. A silent salute. Inside the dressmaker's shop, bolts of fabric line the walls, like soft soldiers in pastel formation. Madame Florent greets you with a practiced smile and a gentle touch to the elbow. She knows. Parasol first. Oh, we've had something exquisite come in this week, she murmurs, motioning to a corner rack. There, perched like royalty on a silk-padded hook, is a parasol so over the top you almost giggle. Pale blue taffeta. White embroidery that mimics cloud wisps. And fringe, so much fringe it practically drapes. You run a gloved finger along its carved ivory handle, and for a brief moment, you wonder if perhaps you've finally met your match. It's beautiful. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. The other clients glance over, and you catch one whispering to her companion. You tilt your head as if appraising the embroidery, but what you're really doing is watching the woman's reaction. Jealousy is the sincerest form of approval. As you test the parasol's weight, you remember the mainstream historical shift that brought us to this very obsession, the industrial boom. With new dyes, imported materials, and mechanical production, parasols became not just practical tools but fashion statements. You no longer needed a servant to carry one. You could own 5, each matching a different hat plume. Madam helps you open the parasol, and the whisper of silk is satisfying, like a secret being unfurled. You step closer to the tall mirror, lifting the parasol to check the shadow line across your face. Perfect. It darkens just under the cheekbones, hiding the slight stress from last night's late supper and too many buttered scones. But here's where things get interesting. The mirror reveals more than you intended, your silhouette under the parasol's canopy. A vague outline, soft but distinct. You freeze. Because while parasols shield you from the sun, they also, when the light is just right, offer a silhouette that borders on risque. There's a fringe anecdote from a century ago about a viscountess whose parasol was made from unusually thin silk. When the sun hit her just right during an afternoon wedding, her entire profile became visible from the right angle, waist to hem. The scandal practically rewrote her marriage prospects. Historians still argue whether the incident was accidental, or a calculated move to snag a duke who enjoyed a bit of mischief. You adjust the parasol angle. No silhouettes today, thank you very much. But the thought lingers. Madame Florent gives you a look of approval, the way only a woman who's seen 3,000 dresses and 9,000 parasols can. She understands the power you now wield. This parasol doesn't just match your gown. It commands it. You arrange for it to be delivered. One doesn't simply carry something so exquisite through London's more uneven streets. As you leave the shop, you feel the sun shift. You unfurl your Old Faithful, the cream lace with scalloped edging, and angle it just enough to cut the glare without obscuring your expression. You're walking the line between mystery and confidence. That narrow, dangerous balance Victorian ladies call taste. On the way home, you pass a group of young girls practicing with toy parasols, twirling and giggling. One imitates a court beau while shielding her eyes, and you catch a glimpse of your younger self. The first time you were given a parasol. It had tiny velvet ribbons along the edge and smelled faintly of lavender. You carried it everywhere, even to bed once. You believed it made you untouchable. A little sunproof sorceress. The memory makes you smile. Not because it's silly, but because it wasn't wrong. Back in your room, you place the cream parasol carefully on its hook and sit at your vanity, the sunlight now drifting in a more forgiving tone. You peer at your reflection, noting the lack of tan lines with quiet satisfaction. The veil of your hat protected your forehead, the gloves your hands, and that perfect parasol shielded everything in between. You reach for the cool water in the basin, pressing a damp cloth to your neck, and let the tension ease. Still, your mind drifts to the new parasol. You can already imagine the first event you'll wear it to. How you'll walk just slowly enough to let the fringe sway like a metronome of elegance. How you'll angle it to catch the envy of a certain someone whose own parasol, while adequate, leans a little too far into the serviceable category. That's the secret. Parasols aren't just barriers to light. They're invitations, shields, flirtations, declarations, and sometimes, if needed, smackdowns with fringe. You don't merely carry shade. You curate it. And tomorrow, with your new taffeta parasol in hand, you'll cure it even better. You wake to the sound of distant hoofbeats, filtered through morning fog and a slightly open window. It's early enough that the sun hasn't begun its assault on the cobblestones yet, but it will. You know it will. And today, you're prepared. Your new parasol arrived last evening, lovingly wrapped in tissue and tied with a velvet ribbon. You unwrap it like it's something sacred, lifting it from the box with the same reverence most people reserve for heirlooms or secret letters. You don't need to open it to know how it will look, cloudy blue with tendrils of white embroidery that flutter when you breathe too close. You could weep, but you don't. Because this morning is no time for tears. It's time for the park. You dress with intention, light muslin gown, soft gloves, a bonnet trimmed with matching pale ribbon. You're not going for loud, no, never loud, but for that particular kind of visibility that says I exist in the center of the painting. And with the new parasol in hand, you will. Outside, the air is still crisp. You wait until you're at the edge of the park before opening your parasol. The mechanism clicks softly, and then you are under it, under your own weather system of elegance. Now begins the parade. Victorian parks are many things, a breathing space for the city, a place for gentle exercise, but mostly, a place to be seen. And seen properly, which is to say, not all at once. Seen in glimpses, reflections, glances. You walk slowly, deliberately, allowing the parasol to swing just enough to suggest that it might not be perfectly balanced, though of course it is. You pass others, women with sunshields of varying ambition. A few cotton. One boldly red satin trimmed in black lace, aggressive, flirty, probably French. You try not to stare. A gentleman tips his hat, and your parasol lowers ever so slightly in acknowledgement. That's another layer of etiquette, timing your gestures with your parasol's movements. A tilt too early and you look overeager. Too late and you appear cold. A perfectly synchronized nod and tilt. That's theater. As you pause near the ornamental fountain, you catch the reflection of your silhouette in the rippling water. The parasol casts a delicate shadow over your shoulder, and your face is dappled with light, like someone half-remembered. Exactly right. Here's a curious mainstream fact. During this era, many urban parks were designed with parasols in mind. Winding gravel paths to allow space for wide skirts and, more importantly, shade-hunting movement. Tall hedges and groves to provide dappled light, which meant your parasol was both a tool and an aesthetic enhancer. You weren't just walking. You were staging a portrait. A bee flits near your wrist, and you gently wave your parasol in a semicircle, not a swat, heavens no. A subtle ward. The bee, like a well-mannered suitor, takes the hint and departs. You keep walking. There's a cluster of gentlemen near the pavilion, pretending to debate something terribly important, but really just watching the circuit of ladies gliding past in timed intervals. One or two carry canes, but none are brave or foolish enough to approach. Your parasol remains angled between you and them. Barrier mode. You feel powerful, shaded, observed, untouchable. But as you round a bend, you spot an older woman seated beneath a tree, her parasol tossed carelessly beside her on the bench. She's absorbed in a book, her skin weathered by time and clearly by sun. A rebel. Or perhaps someone who no longer plays the game. You hesitate. Then continue. That woman might not care about tan lines. She might scoff at flirtation rituals and shade codes. But you do. Because your position, your entire identity in society, is a delicate dance of presentation. You can't afford a careless freckle. It could unravel months of careful cultivation. Here's a lesser-known fringe tidbit. Some women who lacked parasols would fake their ownership. They'd borrow one, parade for a few key hours, then hide indoors for the rest of the week to avoid sun exposure. Others painted white powder onto any exposed skin and carried a closed parasol as though they'd just finished a long walk. Optical illusions of social capital. Historians still argue whether this type of performance counted as deception or simply clever adaptation to a harsh system. You'd argue it was survival. Near the bandstand, you pause again. Not because you're tired, but because this is a prime observation point. You spot Clarissa, a girl you've always suspected of being too perfect, fanning herself furiously while holding her parasol too high. Her entire lower face is exposed. You resist the urge to wince. It's like watching someone spill tea on a ball gown in slow motion. You offer a small, polite smile as you pass, but you make a mental note: Clarissa is slipping. You complete your circuit of the park as the sun climbs higher. You're feeling smug now, like you've outwitted nature itself. No tan. No sweat. Just cool composure under embroidered shade. A walking cloud of control. By the time you return home, the parasol folds with a gentle click, its silk still cool to the touch. You hang it with care, then lift your veil and examine your face in the mirror. Still luminous. Still pale. Your cheekbones untouched by the sun's tyranny. And then, you relax. Another victory in the invisible war. You slip off your gloves and allow yourself a secret grin. Today, the parasol wasn't just etiquette. It was armor. Camouflage. Spotlight. And shield. Not bad for a bit of stitched fabric on a stick. You're not alone in this sun-dodging mission. Your entire social circle, tight-laced, carefully coiffed, and parasol-clutching, is playing the same game. And like any game, there are rules. Not written ones, mind you. No official parasol handbook was handed out at finishing school. These are subtler, whispered down through generations, passed between glove-clad hands and shaded eyes. It starts with posture. You hold the parasol handle slightly forward, elbow loose, wrist light. Too stiff and you look like a governess. Too floppy and you're a child with a toy. The trick is to appear as if the parasol is simply an extension of you, like a wing or a thought. Then comes the walk. You don't march. You glide. The parasol isn't bobbing along behind you like a regrettable duckling, it leads, just a fraction ahead of your steps. The edge should move like a breath. Or like your mood. And yes, there's nuance there too. A woman on her way to decline a marriage proposal carries her parasol differently than one walking toward a new pair of imported French gloves. Of course, the angles matter. Tilt it too far back and your face is exposed, hello, sun. Tilt too far forward and you look like you're hiding, which you might be, but that's nobody's business. Ideally, your parasol shields just enough to cast shadow across your eyes. Mysterious. Sleepy. Slightly amused, as if you know something about everyone and won't be telling. You and your peers talk about these things, just not directly. You notice, you compare, you adjust. At last Thursday's garden tea, Harriet's new maid forgot to remove the label from her parasol's handle. A small, square tag still fluttering with the price, vulgar. No one said a word, but 4 women adjusted their own parasol grips, just to be safe. You remember standing beside the rose arbor, your own parasol elegantly propped on one hip. Not quite open, not quite closed. Balanced like an afterthought. That's how you signal confidence. I could shade myself, but the sun knows better than to touch me. Mainstream fact, by the late Victorian era, parasol etiquette had become a recognizable part of upper and middle-class female behavior. Books on manners included entire passages on how to carry, open, and angle your parasol appropriately in public. Some even warned against spinning them idly, lest one appear flirtatious, or worse, bored. Which brings us to flirtation. Yes, the parasol has its role there too. The coy turn of the wrist. The half-lowered canopy to meet someone's gaze across the lawn. And let's not forget the accidental parasol drop, always within a gentleman's reach. Nothing says talk to me like pretending your fingers simply slipped. There's a legend about a baroness, name long lost, who used parasol signals so deftly she once managed to hold 4 flirtations at the same garden party, each man believing he was her sole object of interest. Her secret? Timing. And fringe. Fringe, you've learned, is both embellishment and tool. It softens shadows, adds motion, and can be twirled gently while pretending not to notice someone watching. But there's danger too. Twirl too aggressively and you signal desperation. Or madness. Maybe both. Historians still argue whether fringe was meant for allure or simply to imitate the fashion of window drapery. Some even claim the trend came from East Asian parasol designs, which made their way to England via colonial trade routes and were promptly overdecorated by well-meaning seamstresses. Speaking of overdoing it, there's a known type at these events, the parasol peacock. You know the type. Elaborate designs, impractical materials. One woman at last season's summer luncheon had a parasol made of dyed pheasant feathers. It didn't block sunlight, it summoned it. She spent the entire afternoon squinting and asking to borrow someone else's shade. A lesson, you suppose, in priorities. Your own parasols, yes, plural, because you're no savage, are curated with care. You have your morning parasol, ivory, practical, your garden party parasol, lavender, playful, your shopping parasol, elegant, unassuming, and your scandal-ready parasol, dark green with just enough tilt for secrecy. Each one has a mood, a message. Each one says something you're far too polite to utter out loud. Today, you meet friends at a conservatory for a viewing of rare orchids. It's hot, unseasonably so, and the parasols are out in full regalia. You take a moment to observe the field. A pale yellow lace, lovely, but barely functional. A black satin edged in ruffles, dramatic. Too dramatic for midday. Possibly mourning a husband or a bad haircut. And then there's yours, embroidered net over pastel linen. Classic. Crisp. Controlled. You chat politely, angling your parasol just right to avoid the beam of sunlight sneaking through the glass ceiling. The orchids sweat in their own quiet way, and you do too, a little, but no one can tell. Because your face is untouched. Because you know what you're doing. A gentleman approaches, and your friends straighten like hunting dogs spotting a fox. You, on the other hand, simply adjust your parasol. Not lowered. Not raised. Just rotated, a quarter turn, so he's forced to walk around it to meet your eyes. He does. You smile. You win. When you finally depart the conservatory, you notice your friend Eugenie holding her parasol too tightly. White-knuckled. Nervous. You don't ask, of course, but later that evening, she sends a note. Turns out, she was hoping that very gentleman would have spoken to her. You feel a flicker of guilt, but also not. Because parasol etiquette is a language and some of you are simply more fluent. The morning is already warm as you step into the carriage, parasol in hand, the scent of lavender still clinging faintly to your gloves. Today's excursion is not for gossip or promenade, it's for something far more serious, the Ladies' Society for the Preservation of Complexions. Yes, it sounds absurd. And yes, it is also terrifyingly real. You attend out of curiosity, not devotion, though you'd never admit that aloud. The society meets once a month at a member's home, rotating venues, always discreet, always shrouded in that gauzy layer of half-truths that high society loves so much. Publicly, it's a tea club. Privately, it's a tactical council for the war on sunlight. Today's host is Lady Dorrington, who takes her skin tone the way some take religion, very seriously, very publicly, and very judgmentally. Her home is darkened with velvet drapes, her mirrors frosted to reduce glare. No one has seen her outdoors between April and September for 3 years straight. You admire her commitment even as you quietly judge her taste in upholstery. As you're shown into the salon, You take stock of the other attendees. Parasols, dozens of them, rest in the marble stand by the door, a bouquet of silk and bone handles and twisted fringe. Some are pristine, others gently battered from real use. It's like reading a room through its weapon rack. You recognize familiar faces. Mrs. Halcombe, with her ivory dome trimmed in blue ribbons. Young Beatrice Fairchild, who's rumored to powder her knees, just in case. And of course, the unnervingly pale Miss Chatham, who claims she once fainted from sun exposure while reaching for a grape. Tea is served, conversation flows, and then, ceremony. Yes, ceremony. Lady Dorrington stands and taps her spoon lightly against her glass. All heads turn. You suppress a smile. This is your favorite part. Each month, the Society honors a member for excellence in complexional preservation. A bastion of pallor, as the certificate proudly reads. The chosen lady rises, demurely adjusts her gloves, and receives a small silver brooch shaped like a parasol. There are polite claps. Occasionally, there are tears. Today's winner, you. You did not see this coming, though in hindsight, perhaps you should have. The conservatory moment. The subtle control. The parasol tilt heard round the orchid beds. As you stand and accept the brooch, you feel equal parts flattered and absurd. Because here you are, being honored for not being touched by the sun. A thing you have actively avoided, obsessively planned around, and, quite frankly, lost sleep over. And now it's rewarded. You suppose that's how most Victorian rituals work, turning minor obsessions into grand ceremonies. Mainstream fact, many women's clubs and societies in the late Victorian era centered around surprisingly specific aspects of etiquette and personal presentation. There were fan societies, glove circles, and yes, complexion clubs, spaces where women could reinforce shared values under the pretense of socializing. But the Parasol Society takes things one step further. During the second half of the meeting, a guest speaker takes the floor. Today it's Mrs. Liddell, a former actress who now lectures on complexion science. She brings with her a chart of skin tones, ranging from alabaster to Café au lait, each meticulously labeled and accompanied by instructions for appropriate social visibility. You feel your stomach twist. It's not just about avoiding tan lines anymore, it's about ranking complexions like prize livestock. The tone is polite, but the implications are razor sharp. Some women in the room glance downward. Others nod eagerly. You suddenly feel the weight of your parasol in a new way. Mrs. Liddell shares a fringe tidbit that catches your attention. Certain women, particularly in rural areas, used ground oyster shells mixed with rosewater as a protective paste. Supposedly, it blocked sunlight and gave a temporary glow. The recipe was banned from some salons due to shellfish allergies and a particularly messy incident involving a goat. Historians still argue whether these kinds of concoctions were true medical solutions or simply homemade rituals meant to offer women a sense of control. Some claim the ingredients were apocryphal, exaggerated by rumor and repetition. But the belief remained, nature could be managed with just the right blend of minerals and mystery. The meeting ends with the group rising to recite the society's closing vow, "Shade is grace, and grace is ours." You mumble along, trying not to laugh. It feels like being part of an oddly genteel cult. Back outside, you retrieve your parasol and step into the brightness. After the darkened salon, the daylight feels theatrical, like someone turned up the gas lamps too high. You open your parasol, instantly soothed by its familiar canopy of shadow. You glance at your new brooch. It sparkles like mockery. Later that afternoon, over lemonade with your sister, you recount the meeting. She snorts into her glass. You know they're all mad, she says, eyes twinkling. Complexion awards. What next, best left eyebrow? You laugh, but part of you still pins the brooch to your vanity mirror that evening. Just to look at it. Just to remember, you were good at this. You played the game. You tilted your parasol at just the right angle, and someone noticed. Whether that matters, well, you're still deciding. You find yourself standing in front of the pier glass in your dressing room, parasol dangling from one wrist, hair still unpinned from the day's heat. Outside, the sky turns sherbet pink as the sun considers retreating, and you consider something else, protection or performance. Because here's the quiet truth no one really says aloud: these parasols, these rules, these careful steps you all follow like dancers in a pageant, they're not just about the sun. They're about status. Yes, the sun can wrinkle you. Yes, it can burn you, leave you with freckles society pretends are tragic rather than charming. But the real danger, looking like someone who has to be outdoors. Someone who works outdoors. And that, in Victorian England, is a scandal all its own. The lighter your skin, the clearer the message: I do not labor. I am not one of them. So, you carry your parasol not just for health, not even for vanity. You carry it because it is a barrier between you and the world of effort, of exertion, of women with sun-reddened necks and calloused hands. The parasol says, I am shielded. I am distant. I float. It is elegant warfare. Mainstream fact: Victorian beauty ideals prized a pale, porcelain complexion as a sign of wealth, femininity, and moral virtue. Exposure to the sun implied outdoor labor, and thus a lower class status, something the upper classes took great pains to distance themselves from. You remember a time, not long ago, when your cousin came in from helping with a church fundraiser, just one afternoon of sorting supplies in the courtyard. She came back pink-cheeked, a little freckled, and was swiftly rested from all future outdoor duties. Her mother claimed she had fainting spells. You knew better. It was the freckles. You lean in now, studying your own reflection. Still pale, still smooth. But your thoughts feel itchy, like the edge of a sunburn before it peels. Later that week, you attend a garden wedding. The kind of affair where everyone pretends it's charmingly rustic, even though the lemonade is imported from France and the bride's lace veil required 6 seamstresses and a half-dozen fainting couches. You arrive early, parasol unfurled, and find a shady bench. You sit, you observe. That's when you see her. A woman, new to town, they say arrives with no parasol at all. At first, you think it must be a mistake. Maybe she lost it. Maybe she's having a breakdown. But no. She's composed. Confident. Her hair is up in a fashionable twist. Her gloves are spotless. She just walks into the sunlight. As if she doesn't know. Or worse, does know and simply doesn't care. Gasps ripple like silk in the breeze. You feel your own parasol tilt slightly forward, instinctive, like a shield raised before an arrow. Your friends whisper behind fans. Australian, someone suggests, as if that explains everything. The woman smiles at the bride, kisses her on both cheeks, and then, scandal of scandals, sits down without shade. You squint. Her skin is lightly golden. Not sunburned. Not damaged. Just warm. She looks like she eats strawberries without cutting them. Like she's not afraid of bees. The discomfort is nearly audible. It isn't just that she's exposed to the sun, it's that she's rejecting the signal. She is undoing years of careful messaging with a single bare shoulder. And yet, she looks happy. Relaxed. Not defiant, but unbothered. Fringe tidbit. There was a brief and quiet rebellion during the 1890s where a small group of upper-class women, mostly artists, writers, and eccentric heiresses, began adopting sunbathing as a form of aesthetic rebellion. They believed light freckles and natural tans gave them the appearance of vitality and youth. Naturally, they were dismissed as bohemian oddities. Historians still argue whether these women genuinely sought to redefine beauty standards or simply found another way to stand apart from their peers. Some say it was proto-feminism, others call it mere vanity in disguise. You shift in your seat. You know you won't follow her example. Not today. Maybe not ever. But a thought creeps in like a draft under the door. What if she's not wrong? You think about the parasol you chose this morning, your sky blue one with the mother-of-pearl tip. You think about how you matched it to your ribbon, your gloves, your handkerchief. How many minutes you spent arranging protection for a sun you barely encountered. And yet, you think about standing barefoot in grass. About not worrying where the shade falls. About your skin simply being skin, not a canvas for judgment or proof of class. But then a breeze picks up and your parasol flutters gently in your grip. It still feels good to hold. Still feels right. You remind yourself, it's not about following her. It's about knowing the rules and choosing when, or if, to bend them. And today, you choose to tilt your parasol ever so slightly to the side. Just enough to let a sliver of sun touch your cheek. A gesture no one else will notice. But you do. You sit that way through the vows. Half in shadow. Half in something else. The next morning, you wake with a single golden crescent blooming high on your cheekbone. Sun-kissed, they would call it now, in the fashion columns written by scandalous ladies with typewriters and loose metaphors. But within your household, it might as well be a brand. A small, traitorous smudge that says you slipped. You touch it gently, then tug the curtain shut a bit harder than necessary. Breakfast is a quiet affair. Your maid says nothing, but her eyes flicker to your face as she pours the tea. That flicker is louder than words. At this rate, the toast might sprout opinions next. You leave the house wrapped in lace and excuses. The day's outing takes you to the botanical gardens, a common choice for refined ladies, especially those who wish to be seen not exerting themselves while pretending to take a scientific interest in begonias. Your parasol is opened before your boots touch gravel. But now, you carry it differently. Not higher, not lower. Just looser. Less like armor, more like an accessory. You notice the weight of it in your hand in a way you never quite did before. Today you're meeting with Cousin Allegra, one of the rare women in your orbit who possesses both social standing and an unusually liberal sense of humor. She once called Queen Victoria a grumpy teapot in widow's weeds, and no one has dared to disagree since. She sees your face before you can angle away. Oh ho, she breathes, leaning in. Has the sun seduced you at last? You roll your eyes, but there's a small flicker of something in your chest. Not shame. Not quite pride. Something like a cracked window in a stuffy room. Allegra takes your arm and steers you toward a side path, the one most visitors avoid because the wisteria there is unruly, and the sunlight comes through in uneven patches. The path of mild rebellion. Mainstream fact, botanical gardens in the Victorian era weren't just for plants, they were social arenas, especially for women. They allowed for movement outdoors while still providing cultivated, shaded spaces deemed appropriate for feminine presence. Many ladies' etiquette books even suggested pre-approved walking routes for gardens based on the position of the sun. Do you know, Allegra says, fanning herself with a pamphlet, I once read that some women keep 2 parasols, one for actual use, and one just for show. Imagine carrying an umbrella you never open. The sheer drama. You nod, thinking of the woman at the wedding. You wonder if hers was a statement or simply an oversight. Either way, it echoed. Fringe tidbit. In certain fashionable circles of London, it became popular in the late 1890s to carry absurdly small parasols, practically useless against sunlight, but highly effective for flirtation. They were nicknamed paraflirts, and some were even perfumed. One notorious duchess had hers custom-made with hidden love notes stitched into the lining. Historians still argue whether these mini parasols were truly statements of changing gender roles or merely another performative accessory in a long line of impractical but symbolic items. Some point to them as proto-modern fashion activism. Others chalk it up to rich people being bored. As you and Allegra walk, a breeze catches your parasol, and you let it sway just enough to feel the warmth on your collarbone. The sun prickles faintly. Not painful. Not ruinous. Just present. You pause near a fountain and notice a pair of young girls chasing each other around the base. One wears a straw bonnet, the other is bareheaded, cheeks blooming red with exertion and glee. You can't help but smile. Do you ever think, you murmur, that all this fuss, parasols and powders, and who's freckled and who's not, it's just a way to distract us from how little we get to do? Allegra stops mid-sip of her tea and lowers her cup. Darling, she says, I think it's exactly that. You stand there for a moment, letting the idea settle. That your parasol might be less a shield from the sun and more a cage with fringe. A beautiful one, sure. But a cage nonetheless. You return home later than expected, your parasol dusty, your feet pleasantly sore. You hang the umbrella on its hook by the door, feeling a strange reluctance to shut it away. Upstairs, the mirror greets you with that same crescent of sun from earlier, but somehow, in the golden hour glow, it looks less like a flaw and more like punctuation. You sit down at your vanity, open the small silver compact you never use, and stare at the powder puff. Then close it again. Not tonight. Instead, you pick up a sheet of stationery and begin to write. To the Honourable Society for the Preservation of Complexions. You don't know yet what the letter will say. Maybe it's a thank you. Maybe it's a resignation. Maybe it's something else entirely, a challenge, a gentle nudge, a question in curlicue script. But it feels good to hold the pen. To be the one writing the rules, even if just for yourself. And outside, the sun sets slow and amber. Not hostile. Not frightening. Just waiting. You dream of paper parasols, hundreds of them, suspended in the sky like jellyfish. They float above a grassy meadow where no one holds them. Just color and shade swaying in the breeze, unattached, untethered. You walk among them, bareheaded, your skin warm but untouched. When you reach for one, it drifts just out of reach. You wake with the scent of lavender still clinging to your pillow and the sense that something has shifted. The morning feels different. It isn't cooler. It isn't quieter. But there's something in the air, a sense of leniency. As if the universe, just for today, is a little more flexible. You dress deliberately. You skip the starched white blouse with its stifling collar. Instead, you choose a pale lavender muslin, gauzy at the sleeves. A hat, yes, but one with an open weave and no veil. And when you reach for your parasol, you pause. Today, you take the small one. The one you once bought on a whim because it matched a hat ribbon. The one too dainty to be useful. The one your mother called silly. It's the paraflirt, the performer, the statement piece. Completely, gloriously unfit for actual sun shielding. It feels like poetry in your hand. Your outing takes you to the coast today, sea air prescribed by the doctor for your cousin's nervous turns. You suspect it's more about social refreshment than health, but you won't object to a few hours near the water. You arrive at the promenade, and immediately, the scent of salt and tea cakes hits your nose. Gulls cry overhead. Somewhere, a brass band is courageously playing through the breeze. Mainstream fact: by the late Victorian period, seaside holidays became increasingly popular among the middle and upper classes, thanks in part to expanded railway access. Resorts like Brighton and Scarborough catered to curative leisure, where a lady could convalesce without compromising her elegance or her pallor. Still, the beach presents a parasol paradox. The sun is stronger. The crowds are larger. Yet the rules begin to fray. You pass women reclining under large linen tents, their maids standing guard with fans and umbrellas. But you also see children digging in sand, boys running with shirts undone, and most shocking, a group of young ladies with their stockings rolled down and toes actually in the seafoam. Cousin Beatrice clutches her smelling salts. "They're going to catch death," she mutters, as if pneumonia rides the tide. You smile tightly, but your heart beats a little faster. You walk with Beatrice along the waterline, your parasol casting barely a saucer of shadow, your shoes crunching on pebbles. The sun is assertive here, unfiltered by trees or awnings. And yet, you don't feel the same tension you used to. You don't feel like prey. You feel oddly like a participant. Like someone living. A breeze snatches your hat and you chase it 2 whole steps before catching it. In those seconds, the sun touches your forehead, your chest, your forearms. You hear Beatrice gasp. But no one faints. When you return to your bench, a young boy points to your parasol and says, "That's a funny little umbrella, miss." You laugh. "It is, isn't it?" Fringe tidbit: there was an underground trend, unspoken but unmistakable, among fashionable women to use deliberately useless parasols as a sort of silent protest. These parasols became status symbols not because of their function, but because of their defiance of function. The less shade they provided, the more daring the woman. Historians still argue whether this practice was merely aesthetic cheek or the early echoes of a growing female self-assertion. Some say it marked the slow loosening of corseted expectations. Others dismiss it as fashion's version of a practical joke. You and Beatrice eventually find a quieter part of the promenade. She rests beneath a pavilion, and you wander a little farther, your steps soft on the planks. You stop by the railing, where the sea glimmers and whispers and doesn't care about freckles or fringe or etiquette at all. You lower your parasol. Just for a moment. The sunlight is warm, not aggressive. Your skin responds like it's been waiting. The spot on your cheek tingles, and you imagine a future where that mark isn't a warning but a souvenir. You don't stay in the sun for long. You still know the rules. But now, you know which ones bend. As you return to the carriage, you see a woman sketching by the seawall. She's wearing no hat, no gloves, just a loose linen gown and a satisfied smudge of charcoal on her cheek. You don't know her, but you smile as you pass. She smiles back. The journey back from the coast rattles along on sun-warmed rails, the countryside blurring past your window in soft greens and wheat gold smudges. You're half drowsing when Beatrice jolts beside you. "That woman at the promenade," she whispers urgently. "The one with the sketchbook. I heard someone say she's an artist, sells her drawings to magazines." You blink awake. And Beatrice lowers her voice like someone sharing scandalous coordinates. And she travels alone. Abroad. Can you imagine? With no chaperone, no maid, no parasol. Her horror is deliciously theatrical, but you're no longer shocked. In fact, the image lingers in your mind long after Beatrice dozes off with a kerchief draped over her nose. An artist. No shade. No safety net. You shift in your seat, feeling the train sway beneath you, and wonder, not for the first time, what it would be like to let go of every polite precaution. To strip yourself of all the careful tools women use to maintain their place in the order of things. Because that's what parasols are, really. They're tools of maintenance. They maintain status, composure, beauty. They separate the polished from the peasant, the refined from the laboring, the acceptable from the improper. Mainstream fact: Victorian parasols weren't just accessories, they were potent markers of social identity. From fabric choice to handle materials, think ivory, ebony, even whalebone, a woman's parasol signaled her class, marital status, and even regional affiliation. Ladies were often advised to match their parasols precisely to their outfits, and using the wrong color for a daytime stroll could invite whispers. But the problem with tools of maintenance is that they can become tools of limitation. You remember learning the proper way to drop your parasol, not too abruptly, not too eagerly. Just a slow, deliberate lowering that signaled mild exhaustion, not carelessness. As if even shade must be managed with elegance. Today, though, you're tired of elegant exhaustion. You return home and find yourself in the sitting room with Aunt Lavinia, who's reading aloud from The Queen, a stiff, self-important periodical that always manages to scold while pretending to admire. It is the duty of every woman to safeguard her complexion as a testament to self-respect, she intones. Then she peers over her glasses. Did you bring your larger parasol with you, dear? I brought a parasol, you say, non-committally. She tsks. Well, you don't want to start looking continental. You consider telling her that you saw a continental woman today who looked delightfully unbothered. You consider telling her about your dream of floating parasols. You consider explaining that a tan isn't a moral failing. Instead, you just smile and say, I suppose it's too late for that. Fringe tidbit: some women in the 1880s began quietly collecting parasols from other cultures, not to use them, but to display them in their homes. Japanese paper parasols were especially popular, treated like exotic trophies. Ironically, these often provided less actual protection from the sun than a silk fan, but they fed into the Victorian obsession with Orientalism and civilized collecting. Historians still argue whether this trend reflected admiration or appropriation. Some claim it represented genuine curiosity about foreign cultures. Others point out the clear pattern of reducing cultural tools to decorative nonsense. You slip away from Lavinia's judgment and retreat to your room. Your parasols are lined up along the wall, 12 in total, each with its own lace sleeve or velvet case. You study them now, not as a lady picking an accessory, but as a woman conducting an inventory of habits. You run your fingers along the handles. The one with the tortoiseshell hook that you used at your first summer cotillion. The cream one that tore in a freak gust at Aunt Clara's funeral. The dusky mauve that never quite matched anything but felt expensive, so you kept it in rotation for show. Each one carries a memory, but also a rule. Don't slouch. Don't sweat. Don't laugh too loudly or open your parasol too aggressively. Don't forget that your parasol must always be positioned on the left, to allow a gentleman to offer his right arm. So many little instructions tucked beneath the shade. Tonight, though, you lift the parasols one by one, dust their handles, and place them in a large traveling trunk. All but two. One, the practical navy silk, is set beside the front door. The other, the absurd paraflirt with the scalloped edge, stays near your vanity. For options, you tell yourself. For possibility. The next morning, you go out early. The sun is barely above the rooftops, and the air carries the bite of early dew. You walk without your usual entourage. No maid, no companion. Just you and your ridiculous, delightful, functionally pointless parasol. You pass a man in a bowler hat who stares at your visible forearms like they've committed a felony. You pass two schoolgirls whispering and giggling, one pointing at your cheek. You smile at both. Let them look. Your skin feels good. That afternoon, you find yourself standing in front of Madame Chenier's millinery shop, which is more greenhouse than boutique. Ivy spills over the awning, and the windows are crammed with blooms, both real and silk. You hadn't meant to come here. Your feet simply brought you. Inside, the shop smells of pressed lavender, warm glue, and wealth. Madame Chenier greets you with a knowing look. She's French, or claims to be, though some say she's from Bristol and simply married well. Regardless, she moves like someone who owns her mystery. You are here for a hat, she says, before you even speak. You nod. Something, less obedient. Her painted brow arches. You wish for defiance. No, you murmur, I wish for honesty. She doesn't laugh. She just leads you to a table with 3 hats already waiting. Wide-brimmed, dramatic, impractical. Like ships caught mid-sail. One has feathers so long they whisper to the hat beside it. You try them on in silence. And then you notice, behind the mirror, a shelf of parasols, unusual ones. A black silk model with red tassels. A translucent one with stars stitched in gold thread. One with no handle at all, just a ribbon loop, like a dancer's fan. Those aren't for walking, you say. No, madam replies. Those are for speaking. Mainstream fact, by the final decade of the 19th century, women's fashion began bending, however slightly, toward functionality. Hats grew broader to provide shade without parasols. Sleeves widened for mobility. And while parasols remained in vogue, more women carried them as theatrical props rather than necessities. Fringe tidbit: some radical suffragettes repurposed parasols during marches and protests. They painted slogans on the panels, messages like "Votes for Women" or "Raise Your Voice." These parasols were rarely documented in newspapers, but memoirs and private collections contain scattered references to them, like flashes of rebellion cloaked in lace. Historians still argue whether these banner parasols were widespread or merely symbolic one-offs. The lack of photographic evidence fuels both camps. Were they erased intentionally, or were they just too fringe to last? You ask Madame Chenier if you can open one of the parasols. She hesitates. Then, gently, she unties the ribbon. It unfurls like a secret. The silk panels are hand-painted in soft strokes, and though the script is faded, you can still make out the words. I am not decoration. You swallow, hard. Madam watches you, unreadable. I'll take this one, you say, brushing your fingers along the spine. And that absurd hat. The one that looks like it's about to take flight. She wraps both in tissue paper, then adds a sprig of lavender. For courage, she murmurs. You walk out with the parcel under your arm, the new parasol looped lazily at your wrist. It doesn't match your dress. It's too dramatic for errands. You don't care. The sky is bright. Not cruel. Just wide. At home, your aunt raises an eyebrow at your new hat. Very theatrical. It's for my complexion, you lie smoothly. You'll cause talk. You flash a smile. Good. They could use something to talk about besides liver tonics and wallpaper. Later, you write again. Not to the society this time, but to Allegra. You tell her about Madame Chenier's shop. The secret shelf. The whisper of rebellion stitched into silk. You don't ask her to do anything. You just share the story. Like passing a match before the wick. Then, a knock at the door. It's Ada, the maid from 2 doors down. She's holding a parcel. "This arrived," she says, breathless. "From Mrs. Hemsley. She said it was for you. Inside is a book. The Woman Who Dared, a fictional tale of a sun-baked explorer with a passion for geology and scandal. And tucked between its pages a postcard, unaddressed, with only 3 words. Burn the umbrella." You laugh out loud. It's such a shocking sound that even Ada grins. You place the book on your nightstand, next to your parasol. And in the mirror, you catch a glimpse of yourself. You still look like you, but slightly less folded. You open your window the next morning and let the light pour in unfiltered. No gauze curtains. No strategic tilt of the blinds. Just the honest, unapologetic sun. It's warm on your face. You close your eyes and breathe. And for the first time, you don't flinch. Your skin, still pale, still protected for years, is now just beginning to shift. There's a faint tone to your cheeks that didn't exist last season. Not a burn, but a bloom. A whisper of presence. You touch it gently, like checking a bruise, but it doesn't hurt. It feels like proof. Downstairs, the house is in its usual flurry, parlor curtains being shaken out, tea being overbrewed, and your aunt loudly negotiating the placement of the fern table. You slip past it all and head to the post office. There's something specific you want, a letter from Allegra. You have a strange sense that something is coming. And it has. Inside the envelope is a long, looping letter in that unmistakable ink-heavy scrawl. She writes, "Darling, I've read every word of your last 3 letters. Twice. And you're right, the parasol is a metaphor. We carry it to avoid being noticed and end up carrying the thing that makes us most visible." She continues, telling you of her travels of Cairo and Carthage and a woman she met who dyes her skin deliberately with crushed pomegranate peel, because, she says, the sun has never been my enemy. You read that line again. The sun has never been my enemy. You tuck the letter into your dress pocket and begin to walk. Slowly. No destination. Just the long stretch of cobblestone, your parasol swinging, not upright, not shading, but half open at your side. Decorative. Symbolic. Deliciously disobedient. Mainstream fact. By the 1890s, even etiquette books had begun to soften on strict parasol usage. Where once it had been considered disgraceful to appear in public without one, some authors now referred to it as an optional expression of style. Not every lady followed suit, of course, but the cracks were forming. Fringe tidbit: there was an infamous garden party hosted in 1897 by a minor duchess in Hampshire, during which guests were encouraged to leave their parasols at home. She wanted to let the sunlight bless their skin and handed out small wreaths of rosemary and myrtle instead. Predictably, society columns exploded. Some guests fainted. Others danced barefoot on the lawn. The Duchess was never invited to host again, but the story spread like spilled ink among the quietly rebellious. Historians still argue whether the sun-drenched garden party was a proto-feminist statement or just the whim of an eccentric aristocrat with too much wine and too few boundaries. Either way, it left its mark. You think of that Duchess now as you walk, the sun slipping over your shoulders, your parasol drifting like a musical note beside you. You pass 2 older ladies on a bench. One leans close to the other. She's carrying it, the first one whispers. Not using it. Must be foreign, says the other. You wink at them. Not out of cruelty, but out of liberation. The church bells toll the hour, and the street empties a little. You see young girls skipping rope in the next alley, their sleeves pushed up. Their mothers don't scold them. You wonder what will happen to those girls. Will they grow up ducking into the shade? Or will they find other metaphors to drop? At home, you unpack a box you've been ignoring for months. Inside are old photographs, tintypes of your mother, your grandmother, even a great-aunt whose name you've forgotten. Each woman holds a parasol. In some, the parasols are pointed skyward like armor. In others, lowered like stage props. One photograph, the oldest, shows a woman on a cliff's edge, wind in her hair, her parasol turned inside out by the gale. She's laughing. You stare at that one the longest. Later that evening, you write again. Not to Allegra. Not to the society. But to yourself. Today, I didn't hide. The sky was open. My arms were bare. My face is pink. Not because I forgot, but because I chose. You fold the note and tuck it under your pillow. A souvenir of your own making. As dusk arrives, you sit on the porch, sipping tea that's gone tepid. Your parasol leans beside you, not opened, not closed, just there. And in that moment, you realize the strangest thing of all. You don't need to burn the umbrella. You just need to know when to carry it and when to let it rest. You wake the next morning to a sky dappled with lazy clouds and the smell of something faintly metallic in the air, rain, maybe. Or the promise of it. The house is still asleep. Not even the cat has stirred from his perch on the back of the settee. You tiptoe past the squeaky stair and out into the garden barefoot. The grass is wet and cool, clinging to your toes like the world is trying to remember you. You stretch your arms above your head, and this time, you don't scan for neighbors watching behind twitching curtains. You just stretch. The kind that pulls along your spine and makes you feel slightly more animal than angel. And then, why not, you bring the parasol. The banner one. The one with the ghostwriting across the silk. I am not decoration. It doesn't match your robe. You don't care. You step out beneath the heavy-lidded sky and twirl the parasol above you, slowly, letting the light flicker through the translucent panels. It isn't meant for shade. It isn't even meant for weather like this. It's barely a barrier against drizzle. But oh, it's something else entirely. It's a message. Mainstream fact, around the turn of the century, department stores began marketing parasols with more playful patterns, lighter materials, and novelty trims. Florals. Stripes. Ruffles. These weren't strictly about sun protection, they were about mood. About making the accessory speak, even if softly. A parasol could now be a flirtation, a rebellion, or a joke, sometimes all at once. Fringe tidbit. There was a brief London craze in 1901 for parasols that mimicked jellyfish. Transparent panels, dangling ribbon tentacles, and handles painted pearlescent blue. It lasted a summer, mocked by satirists as the floating embarrassment, but for a moment, the streets looked like an ocean of eccentricity. Some women even wore matching sea glass jewelry. It was frivolous. It was silly. It was fun. Historians still argue whether these trends marked a departure from the parasol's role as a strict social regulator or just another way for the elite to repackage old expectations in whimsical wrapping. Did parasols become more liberated? Or were they just better camouflaged as expression? You think back to the garden party duchess, to Allegra, to the schoolgirls and their bare elbows, and decide, maybe both are true. Maybe rebellion wears lace. And maybe that's enough. The clouds begin to darken, and you stay outside. The first drops are cold and almost shy, like they're asking permission. Then the drizzle thickens, and you can't help it, you laugh. Not loudly, not maniacally. Just one of those quiet, shoulder-lifting laughs that come when something inside you lets go. It's like being unpinned. The parasol, in its delicate refusal to shield you, gets wet. The dye smudges just a little at the edge. The old lettering seeps into itself, ghosting a message more softly now. I am. You stop spinning it. You just stand. When you come back inside, your aunt clucks at your damp hem, but doesn't say much else. There's a softness to her tone you haven't heard before. She looks at your cheeks, rosier now than ever, and doesn't mention cream or complexion. Instead, she says, "You look awake." You nod. I am. And that evening, when your society newsletter arrives, you don't tear it open right away. You place it gently on the side table and pour yourself a cup of chamomile. The kettle whistles. The sky outside goes indigo. Later, you'll read the newsletter. Later, you'll write something witty and possibly scandalous. But for now, you just sit. Bare arms. Bare feet. A slight flush on your skin that doesn't beg forgiveness. You don't need to be bold every minute. Sometimes, resting is resistance too. The letter arrives 3 days later. Thicker than usual. Heavier, too. And sealed with an unfamiliar mark, wax pressed with a parasol turned upside down. You pause. It's not from the society. Inside, 5 folded sheets, hand-cut. And the handwriting, familiar but different. Like someone trying on their true voice for the first time. It's Allegra. But not just Allegra. The letter begins, "Dearest, you were right about everything." It goes on to explain that the Society for the Preservation of Delicate Complexions has fractured. Not exploded. Not dissolved. Just cracked open, like a seed. There was an emergency meeting, she says. A heated one. Apparently, a small but loud faction, her words, rose up to suggest the mission of the society be reimagined. Not ended. Reimagined. Less about protection, more about permission. Less hiding from the sun. More choosing how to meet it. They proposed a new name, the Shade Optional Assembly. It sounds ridiculous. It also sounds exactly right. There was shouting. Fanning. A broken teacup. One woman fainted, but Allegra suspects she staged it for effect. In the end, nothing was decided officially. But the very fact of the conversation, that was a rupture in the wallpaper. Mainstream fact, by the early 20th century, especially post-Edwardian era, fashion trends began embracing a sun-kissed look. Thanks largely to figures like Coco Chanel, who famously returned from a Riviera holiday with a tan that launched 1,000 imitators, pale ceased to be the only acceptable complexion. The parasol didn't vanish overnight, but it began losing its absolute hold on respectability. Fringe tidbit: some enterprising Parisian artists in 1910 designed sunlight diaries, booklets where women could record their time spent in daylight, not as a warning, but as a prideful tally. 12 minutes uncovered near the Seine, reads one surviving entry. Felt scandalous. Glorious. Historians still argue whether this shift in attitudes was liberating for all women, or merely replaced one impossible standard with another. Did suntans become the new tyranny of beauty? Or was it simply a pendulum swing, one more cycle in a long carousel of control? You set the letter down and stare out the window. The sky is the color of milk, with just a streak of buttercream at the horizon. Your parasol sits in the corner. unfolded. Your skin is darker now than it's ever been. Not dark by any real measure, but not pale, either. A soft, even flush that has nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with freedom. You walk into your aunt's sitting room. She looks up from her embroidery. You say, "I think I'm going to the park." She eyes the clouds. "You'll be caught in it." You smile. "Maybe that's the point." She nods, and it means more than you expected. You don't take the parasol this time. You don't need it. You don't need to make a statement. You're just going for a walk. And as your boots crunch over gravel and the air smells like rain that's changed its mind, you pass another young woman on the path. She has a parasol, not opened, but slung casually over one shoulder like a jacket she forgot to wear. You nod. She nods back. No secret handshake. No coded whisper. Just a moment of mutual understanding. You don't know her name. You don't need to. The shade is optional. And you're both okay with that. You're walking slower now. The sky above you melts into a deepening blue, stars still tucked in, waiting for their cue. The breeze is softer than silk against your cheek, and the path beneath your feet grows quieter with every step. The parasol, if it's with you at all, is resting loosely in the crook of your arm. Not a shield. Not a symbol. Just fabric, bones, and history. You sit on a bench, wooden and worn smooth by time. The kind that creaks beneath you but doesn't complain. Somewhere nearby, a bird trills, sleepy, out of tune, and perfect. You take a deep breath. The kind that feels like settling down into your own body. No corset. No code. Just you. Your skin glows faintly in the moonlight now, warmed by days lived honestly. Not recklessly, not rebelliously, but intentionally. You didn't win a revolution, but you made space for the possibility of one. You close your eyes. The wind picks up slightly and tugs at your hem, then dies down again, like even the weather has decided to let you be. Tomorrow will bring a new dress, a new glance from across a room, a new silly rule in a dusty book you'll pretend to follow. But for now, you are unobserved, unworried, unfolded. Sleep comes easy like this, like fading into fabric, light, and your own quiet breath. Like knowing you don't have to be anyone else when you wake. Just you. And maybe a slightly scandalous hat.